So today with my 1997 Lotus Elise, I'll be changing nothing. Absolutely nothing. The thing's actually running alright at the moment. I know I promised a bunch of filming from events, track days, etc. with that, but COVID kind of got in the way, and then it rained. A lot. Welcome to Scotland. I was never really able to film anything from inside of me just driving about that I was happy with, and I reckon in-car stuff's going to be next year, because that's coming back into the garage for some more upgrades pretty soon. In the meantime though, I need to clear the garage out. And by clear the garage out, I mean I need rid of this thing. Now this is a 1963 Jaguar Mark II 3.8 litre with the optional sunroof. Why does the sunroof matter? I don't know, but apparently it does. It's about the values. So today all we're really going to be doing is giving this a quick check over before we start it up. The car was in for more or less a bare shell restoration. This shell was painted 20 years ago by my dad. It was then put into a corner by the person that was building the car and then not touched. So 20 years later we got the phone call, do you want to put it back together? And we said yes. The shell's actually held up pretty well. There are a couple of little sections where rust is bubbling through the paint. That's down to one thing, a waterproof car cover. That sounds a bit counterintuitive, but the problem with waterproof car covers on long-term storage is that water can't get through them, which seems like the point, but if condensation gets under it and it's against your car body, it can't escape. So eventually, it makes its way through. For the most part though, this shell's pretty solid, and we got it in as, well, a bare rolling shell, and now we've almost got it done. We've got a little bit of wiring to go, and then it's on its way out. So our job today is to get the plugs out, make sure everything's clear there, clean the plugs off, and see if it'll start. Sounds simple, but I'm going to spend a lot of time cutting this in with gratuitous, unnecessary footage of an old Jaguar, because it's neat.
So before we get on to doing the plugs, let's have a little look at the car itself. This is a 1963 Jaguar Mark II 3.8 litre. The shell was painted 20 years ago and has actually held up pretty well, although there is some minor bubbling in the paint which we won't really be touching here other than to give it a proper polish later on when we do the rest of the car. The engine is a 3.8 litre straight 6, making 220 horsepower and enough torque to pull, well, 1.5 tons of Mark II Jag, and, you know, all the gold in the book from the bank you've just robbed. And that's coming in via twin SU carburetors. The engine has had a plethora of new seals and gaskets thrown at it as part of a general refreshing, and so despite being nearly old enough to apply for a pension, it leaks not one drop of oil. The car has hydraulic disc brakes all round to help it stop, which were a rarity for the time, and it's riding on brand new uprated Kone suspension to make it handle as well as any Jaguar should. Moving on to the interior, all of the original woodwork was retained for the doors, and the existing leather for the seats and door cards was carefully removed before the seats were re-upholstered in brand new foam and padding to keep the car looking as original as possible while giving back a certain amount of the comfort you'd expect from a car like this. The headlining was then also replaced at the same time, along with every single weather seal on the entire car. We don't really want any drips coming in on this, even if it is a bit more of a Sunday cruiser than a daily driver. In the front of the car, things are a little less finished. Although the original woodwork and chrome is all in place and polished up, there's still some wiring work to be done to replace old worn or corroded wires for some of the dash switches and the radio. It's also worth noting that for this car we've fitted a more modern Jaguar 6-speed gearbox using a special little gear linkage to place the gear stick in its exact original position, so you'd never know that it was there until you went to grab reverse. The car also has a few other cool features such as an ashtray for every seat, because 60s, and a boot you could genuinely hide the butler's body in, complete with new boot liners and the full toolkit. The quarter windows also open with these little levers, which, if I'm honest, is one of my favourite parts about these old cars. And also Jaguar's classic 1960s air conditioning system. Yeah, you'd maybe be better just opening up the sunroof, to be honest.
Now, while I do make jokes about the sliding steel sunroof being one of those silly high-value things in these older cars, it's not the same deal as those people that tell you their Corvette's the rarest Corvette because it's red with blue wheels, and the only one made in that colour combination. The thing about these sliding steel sunroofs, well, the factory-fitted ones anyways, is that they're really rare, and they're really rare for a reason. You see, when you were speccing your brand new Mark II Jag, you had plenty of options of what to put in it. You had engine size, trim, bits and bobs, switches, all sorts. However, depending on who you ask, supposedly there were a few options that weren't even in the sales brochures, such as this sliding steel sunroof. And it's actually almost a different car from a standard Mark II, because this wasn't a simple case of cutting a hole in the roof and sticking in a steel sunroof. The cars that had the factory fitted ones were
were actually a different body shell, strengthened to deal with the lack of, well, roof. There are of course plenty of other retrofitted versions, such as the Webasto ones, which button down around the outside and look a little bit like you bought some buttons in a tent, and one or two other copy steel sunroofs, which can be identified by the fact they've got two support bars that run right around here on either side. The way to spot a factory fitted one is that there's no additional support, and you can see there are drain holes down the four corners which lead down the A and C pillars to take water away from the top, which is why there's no rubber seals in here. So there's a little bit of Jaguar history for you, and these are exceedingly rare. I know of 3 others that I've managed to find. This is the only one I've seen in the UK. Will there be more? Almost definitely. Will there be a lot more? Probably not. So let's get on to doing our spark plugs. This is all pretty straightforward stuff. We just crack them off, loosen them up, and then we can pull them all out of the engine as normal. Now I'm just going to spin the engine over without the plugs in to make sure there's no water in the bores, and then we can move on to checking the actual state of them. These ones are pretty sooty from spending the last year only really being started up to move in and out of the garage, so we'll just clean them off with a wire brush. It's worth noting that this only works with copper plugs and you can't do it with iridium. Feels a bit weird working on one of these. My dad always talks about how my granddad sold his cement truck in the 60s and bought a brand new Mark II Jag. Must have looked a bit out of place pulling up to their council estate house with all 8 of the kids in the back seat. Anyways, with our plugs all clean, we can get them installed back in the car, and then after checking we have plenty of coolant and enough oil in the engine, we can go ahead and start it up.
So when you first started the car up after it's been sitting for a while, you really want to let it sit. In this case, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, that's usually a safe margin. And then we can take it off the choke, make sure it's revving out and not fouling up the plugs. Well, that all started up and ran fairly well, so it looks as if our plugs are sorted out. Now with these old cars it always starts off a wee bit smoky and a bit rough when you run them at first, especially when they're on the choke. However, once it's been left to warm up, they run just fine. So it looks as if we won't be needing a set of plugs for this after all. So I hope you enjoyed having a wee poke about this old lump of leather, as much as I've had fun, well, watching it take up my spot in the garage.